By the time you hear it coming, it's already over. Israel just tested a missile traveling at 24,000 kilometers per hour. Not 400, not 4,000. 24,000. And the moment that data reached the desks of military analysts around the world, the room went completely still. A decade ago, engineers called this velocity theoretically unachievable. Not difficult, unachievable. And yet, here we are, looking at verified test results that have quietly reshaped every conversation happening inside the world's top defense ministries. Consider this: the fastest operational missile in current global service tops out near 3,000 kilometers per hour. What Israel just demonstrated is 8 times beyond that benchmark. 8 times. No existing radar architecture is calibrated to track an object moving at this velocity. No intercept system is built to respond in that time frame. By the time any processing unit registers the signal, the mission is already complete. Washington observed, Moscow observed, Beijing observed, and for the first time in a very long while, not one of them issued a public statement. No briefing. No counter-claim. No official narrative. Pure, unscripted silence in the world of geopolitics. When every major power goes quiet at the same moment, that silence carries more weight than any press release ever could. Let's establish the foundation, because raw numbers without context tell only half the story. Israel's hypersonic program has been progressing for years, methodically, quietly, and entirely outside of public awareness. What surfaced recently is not an early-stage prototype sitting in a research facility. This is an operationally viable system, one that has been evaluated under real flight conditions, against real parameters with verified outcome data. At 24,000 kilometers per hour, this weapon sits firmly in the hypersonic category, a classification reserved for objects traveling beyond Mach 5, or 5 times the speed of sound. This particular system operates near Mach 20. For perspective, a standard commercial aircraft cruises at approximately 900 kilometers per hour. This missile covers ground roughly 26 times faster. The precision engineering required to stabilize an object at that velocity, manage the extreme thermal load, and maintain targeting accuracy throughout the flight path represents a level of technical achievement that most institutions believed was still years away. This is not merely a weapon. It is a statement of capability, one the global community was not fully prepared to receive. But the velocity is not even the most sobering part of this story. What this system is capable of beyond Mach 20, the behavior, the precision, the implications for every existing intercept architecture on Earth, that is what left analysts genuinely at a loss for words. Stay with me, because the next section reframes everything. This is where the story moves from impressive to genuinely sobering. Any object traveling at hypersonic velocity generates an intense thermal reaction around its surface. The friction between the projectile and the atmosphere produces heat so extreme that the surrounding air becomes ionized, transforming into a superheated plasma envelope that wraps the entire body of the missile. This phenomenon, known as plasma blackout, creates a condition where conventional radar signals cannot penetrate the surrounding layer to get a reliable return signal. The object, in practical terms, becomes untraceable to standard tracking infrastructure. The US Patriot battery, Russia's S-400, China's HQ-19. Each of these systems was engineered to engage targets with a response window of several seconds. That window allows the system to compute trajectory, calculate intercept coordinates, and launch a countermeasure. At 24,000 kilometers per hour, that window collapses entirely. The arithmetic simply does not support a response. This is not a political assessment. It is a straightforward calculation that every defense engineer reviewing this data has had to confront. Every intelligence agency with a budget and a mandate is asking this exact question right now. Israel occupies a territory roughly equivalent to New Jersey. Its population sits around 9 million. By conventional measures of scale, it should not be producing weapons technology that forces the world's largest military powers into emergency internal reviews. And yet, consistently, it does. The explanation is rooted in circumstance. Israel has operated under existential pressure since its establishment. That pressure, sustained over generations, created an institutional culture where military innovation is not optional. It is the baseline requirement for continued existence. That environment over decades produced an ecosystem where necessity and engineering excellence became inseparable. The timing of this disclosure, however, is not coincidental. Strategic revelations of this nature are calibrated, releasing verified capability data at this specific point in regional tensions. With Iran accelerating its own programs, with proxy networks active across multiple borders, sends a measured, unambiguous signal to every party watching. The message requires no translation. The capability speaks for itself. The reaction that followed this disclosure is, in many ways, as significant as the disclosure itself. Within hours of the information becoming available, senior officials across multiple defense ministries convened closed-door sessions. Not public briefings, internal reviews. That distinction matters. Public briefings happen when governments have a prepared response. Internal sessions happen when they do not. Russia's state-aligned media attempted a measured dismissal, a predictable initial posture. What was notably absent, though, was any direct technical rebuttal from a senior Russian defense figure. That absence spoke volumes. Beijing's official channels produced nothing, zero public acknowledgement. But within research and procurement circles, reports emerged of accelerated internal timelines for programs that had previously been moving at a standard pace. Even Washington, Israel's most significant strategic partner, processed this development through private diplomatic channels rather than open commentary. Officials who would typically move quickly to claim shared credit stayed notably reserved. When every major power chooses restraint over response, it is not indifference, it is recalibration. Context requires comparison. So let's place this system alongside the most advanced programs currently in existence. Russia's Vanguard glide vehicle holds a top speed near Mach 27. However, it functions as a delivery mechanism for a nuclear payload launched atop an intercontinental ballistic missile. Its deployment requires substantial preparation infrastructure, extended readiness timelines, and is oriented entirely around strategic nuclear deterrence, not conventional precision strike. The American Hypersonic glide vehicle program and China's DF-ZF system both operate in the Mach 10 range, approximately 12,000 kilometers per hour. Both remain in advanced testing phases with operational deployment still pending. What separates the Israeli system is not purely the speed metric. It is the configuration. A compact, conventionally armed, precision-guided system capable of operational deployment without nuclear infrastructure that represents a fundamentally different application of hypersonic technology. The distinction is significant. Other programs were built for scale and deterrence. This one was built for precision and deployment. In contemporary conflict environments, that difference reshapes the entire calculus. No honest assessment of this development can avoid addressing the regional context directly. Iran has invested heavily, financially and diplomatically, in constructing what its leadership describes as a strategic missile umbrella. The architecture relies on volume, a broad network of ballistic and cruise missiles intended to saturate Israeli defense systems through sheer numerical pressure. The underlying premise was that overwhelming quantity could compensate for individual visual precision. That premise has been fundamentally challenged. Israel's focus, meanwhile, has been oriented towards speed and precision over accumulation. A system traveling at 24,000 kilometers per hour launched from Israeli territory reaches Tehran in under 4 minutes. Iranian early warning infrastructure requires a minimum of 6 to 8 minutes to complete an initial threat assessment and initiate any coordinated response protocol. That gap, between 4 minutes and 6, represents the core shift in the regional equation. It is not rhetorical. It is a structural change in how every party in this region must now plan, position, and calculate. The implications extend well beyond one region or one rivalry. Every nation currently relying on existing intercept infrastructure, Patriot batteries, S-400 installations, added deployments, must now evaluate those systems against a threat profile they were never designed to address. Retrofitting or replacing that infrastructure is not a short-term project. It requires years of development, procurement cycles, and budgets measured in the hundreds of billions. Nations across Asia, the Gulf, and Eastern Europe, many of whom have been monitoring regional developments closely, will accelerate their own advanced acquisition conversations. South Korea, Japan, India, and several Gulf partners will reassess their strategic posture in light of what has now been demonstrated as achievable. One verified test result ripples outward across procurement tables, defense budgets, and strategic planning sessions on every continent. The weapon itself is contained. The consequences of its existence are not. To appreciate what just happened, you need to understand the environment that made it possible. Rafale Advanced Defense Systems, Elbit Systems, and Israel Aerospace Industries are not conventional defense contractors. They function as deeply integrated research institutions operating under the urgency of a nation that has never had the margin for technological complacency. The Iron Dome, the system that captured global attention for its intercept capabilities, was the visible output of this ecosystem. What has been developing beneath the surface, in parallel programs rarely discussed in public forums, represents a far broader portfolio of capability. Directed energy research, autonomous system development, cyber, kinetic integration, advanced propulsion, these threads have been progressing simultaneously for decades. The Hypersonic program is not an isolated achievement. It is one output from a sustained, compounding investment in capabilities that most external observers were not tracking closely enough. The result, ultimately, reflects what happens when sustained necessity meets sustained engineering excellence over a long enough timeline. Capability at this level does not remain confined to military planning rooms. It reshapes the diplomatic environment around it. Nations that had grown comfortable applying sustained political and economic pressure on Israel now face a recalculated risk environment. The variables in that equation have shifted, and recalibrating a foreign policy posture is not a quick process. For the Abraham Accords partners, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and others, this development reinforces the strategic value of their normalized relationship with Israel. Access to shared intelligence frameworks and defense cooperation becomes considerably more meaningful when one partner demonstrates this level of verified capability. For states maintaining formal hostility, the risk-reward calculation attached to escalatory posturing has quietly become more complex. The asymmetry that previously existed has narrowed, or in certain dimensions, reversed entirely. Power shapes diplomacy, always has. The power configuration in this part of the world just moved in a measurable, verifiable direction. The diplomatic consequences will surface gradually, but they will surface. Developments of this magnitude never represent a conclusion. They represent the opening of a new phase. The pattern that follows verified capability disclosures is historically consistent. Initial skepticism gives way to internal acknowledgement. Acknowledgement triggers accelerated competing programs. Acceleration reshapes alliance structures, procurement priorities, and strategic doctrine across multiple nations simultaneously. Moscow will redirect resources toward next-generation propulsion research. Beijing will compress its own development timelines. Washington will convene reviews of existing doctrine and quietly deepen its technical cooperation with Tel Aviv. Iran faces a more immediate set of choices. The strategy that has defined its regional posture for the better part of 2 decades, accumulation, volume, proxy pressure, now operates against a backdrop where the opposing side has demonstrated a fundamentally different and more precise form of capability. Continuing the same approach requires accepting a changed risk environment. Pivoting requires resources, time, and a recalibration of objectives that will not happen quickly or cleanly. The system has been demonstrated. What every government, every analyst, and every strategic planner now has to work through is what they do with that information. That process is already underway, and where it leads, no one can say with certainty yet. If this perspective gave you something the mainstream coverage missed, pass it to someone who would want to know. Leave your take in the comments. Do you believe other nations can close this gap, or has a permanent shift just occurred in how military power is measured? Follow for ongoing coverage of geopolitical and defense developments that go deeper than the headlines.